this is how this sort of spun out for us. Like after the first couple, hey, wait a minute, maybe we should do this differently. We realized that that opened all kinds of opportunities for presenting data that is super useful to the intended audience. So this one, the intended audience is a teacher. And this is what we would call a classroom profile. I had intended, with the introduction of our objective, to make it clear that I am not in this room, and I hope that you believe me, to sell you something. I am not here to sell you a product. I am here to sell ideas. Many of you have assessment departments that are very capable organizations, right? Diana's nodding her head. Palm Beach, yes. Yes, we have that kind of group. I am hoping that you take these ideas and become a sophisticated consumer. You look at a report and say, I don't think this is answering the question that we should be asking. I think we should ask this question, and I need your help to answer it that way. That's my intent. My advice is that if you start reporting results in terms of percentile rankings, you can get to something like this, that is one sheet of paper that tells a really big story for a teacher. What do you guys see in this visual that is new information? And what do you wonder about it? You see student demographics data. Why do you think we put the demographics data on that piece of paper? What does that allow the teacher to begin to do? It's starting to look for patterns. With whom am I successful? And with whom am I least successful right now? Right? We can start to ask those questions. What else do you see that's different or new? It's right there, and I don't have to go chase it. I don't have to request it. This is what I mean about sophisticated, picky eater consumer. Now that you've seen it, want it. Go ask for it. Make the case. Like, if you walk away from here really understanding how this helps you, either as a teacher, understand how to serve your kids better, or as a principal, how to counsel your teachers better, make the argument. So we've heard that we have subgroup data, and that helps us to understand who we're serving well and not well. We've heard that just having all of the students on one sheet of paper, helpful, allows us to see patterns. What else? What else do you see that is either new or different? Prior year proficiency level. So why do you think that column is in there if it's already offered as a, in this case, it's prior year FSA? You've already got that line in there. Why would we need both of those things? That seems odd to me. It seems like a duplication. We've got that piece of information there twice. Why would we show you graphically where it is, right? I mean, give you an example. If I see this vertical bar here, what achievement level was that student in the prior year, we think? A 5, right? Why do I need to tell you it's a 5 here? For the students that are level 1 and 2, there's additional information in there. But I would offer, we've already got those lines in here in the achievement levels also. It may not be clear on the screen, but those cut points are already reflected. So again, these cut points that you're looking at on this visual are for 5th grade math. 4th grade math's cut points are different. They're not usually different by much, but they're different. So sometimes the achievement level of the student on the 4th grade cut points is not what we would interpret looking at it on the 5th grade cut points. This becomes important when you're calculating learning gains, right? So that's why that column's there. What do you notice that's different about this visual and Leslie Knope? I'm gonna go back to Leslie Knope. This is Leslie Knope, right-hand side. Imagine the conversation you're having to prepare for with Leslie Knope. And now let's go to here, Ben Wyatt. What do you notice that's different? It's all, yeah, right? It was so obvious a question you thought I was trying to trick you. I wasn't trying to trick you. This is the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of what you see sometimes when you were looking at data this way. Mr. Ben Wyatt's outcomes are frickin' awesome. I would offer that this is the goal, right? If you want to know that the training or support that you're offering to a teacher is having the desired effect, if you see this kind of growth in your kids, whatever you're doing is working, right? I mean, how many of these students are growing a year's material in a year's time. That's growth indicator number 1. All but 2, what's the percentage? It's 91% because we give it to you in the header, and if you want to know how we're calculating that 91%, that's what the numerator and denominator columns are. So you guys are, I'm sure, familiar with how school grades get calculated. We're just telling you, for every kid, yes, they were included in the denominator, and they met the criteria for that growth indicator. So we see a classroom where 91% of the students have a green line, which is to say their percentile ranking is staying the same or going up. This is a terrific place to start. But here's my question to you. Is maintaining a percentile ranking always quickly enough? If you have a student that comes in at the 10th percentile, they could even make it to the 12th percentile. They're still a low-level 1 or a mid-level 1, and that's not enough. And I mean, it's not enough for school accountability purposes, but it's just not enough. They're never gonna make it to proficiency, probably. And that's the point, right? This is the idea of organizing a group of people around this question of quickly enough. It's really easy to say, and it's not that hard to think through, right? I mean, if our kids are on grade level or above, at a minimum, maintain that percentile ranking. I would argue the definition should be that a 3 should be a 4. Because as we all know, 3 does not mean you're proficient. 3 means you count for proficiency. It does not mean that you're proficient, right? So here's the cool part. If you have assessment groups that are gonna build things like this for you, you get to come up with these definitions. My point is, have them. Like, have the conversation and orient your thinking around how many of our kids are growing quickly enough. That's a vastly more satisfying measure than how many of our kids are proficient. I say it's vastly more satisfying because every kid matters. Every one of them. Doesn't matter what end of the spectrum they're on, all of them count. And I think that does good things for how we think about, how we plan for instruction. I'm gonna tell you a thing I think is true. If you are in a district that has high-performing schools, the leaders whose heads will explode when they see their data for the first time this way are the ones that are in high-performing schools. Because those schools, to this point, have largely gotten a pass. They have largely benefited from kids that come in, literally come in the door in kindergarten so far ahead that it takes years and years and years for many of those students to march backward. The process happens so quickly that in many cases, those kids even still earn learning gains in some years. Like, those are the people whose heads will explode. Our experience is that the principals in lower performing schools, quote, lower performing schools, it just gives them insight that is super helpful in conversations with teachers. Like, maybe what we're doing here is almost self-defeating. This unproductive focus toward the middle is not actually serving anybody well. And in fairness to the student, she said sometimes we talk about scale scores and so many points and it's not meaningful to the student. I would argue it's not meaningful to the teacher either, or the parent, right? I mean, we're just trying to provide context that makes it clearer in terms of whether or not they're learning quickly enough and how far they have to go to get to proficiency or actual proficiency, level 4. Okay, so I think we landed the point. I mean, the deal is, if you are looking at the data this way, you can start thinking about setting goals that are around growth indicators instead of percent proficient. How many of my kids are learning a year's material in a year's time? How many are learning quickly enough? You even have, in the second one, you have some liberty as to what that definition would be. So keep going. All right, so in your chart that you'll get here, that's the big idea number 4. Setting improvement goals around percentages of students and the rates at which they are learning. All right, moving on. This gentleman brought up school grades in the conversation. Do you think it's important to connect the conversations you're having with teachers about growth and school grades? Are the teachers concerned about it?
They are because their leaders are.
That's a different thing. Are they intrinsically concerned about it?
No.
So I am encouraging us all to think about how we can decouple those things. And this gentleman alluded to how we can do that. You can have feedback to a teacher that has nothing to do with school grades. It has to do with the mission of 100% of your kids should be growing quickly enough. Let's talk about what that means and how we get there. It doesn't have to have a thing to do with school grades. However, to your point, school grades matter to the people running the buildings and the people running the people that run the buildings and the people that support the people that are running the buildings, right? It's a currency in Florida that is important whether we want it to be or not. So my point is, if you were going to predict school grades, I'm gonna show you how I would do it if I were you, right? If you were gonna go to your people and say, let's do it like this, I'm gonna show you how I would do it. I would use this chart, which is just a mapping of the achievement levels on FAST in terms of percentile rankings. And I know I'm gonna go fast here, but it comes from here. So this is the retrofitted data file for PM3 for 22-23. If you're in a district of any size, you're gonna have a lot of matched pairs that tell you this scale score is this percentile at PM3. You with me so far? If you have those matched pairs, you can do the curve fits. You can find the cut points in terms of scale scores because those are public record, they're sitting right there, and you end up with this table. Like, it takes some doing, but it isn't rocket science. It's a relatively straightforward process. Once you've done that, then you can build a report that looks something like this. And this is principal facing, regional superintendent facing. This is the how is this playing out in terms of school grades. What do you notice that's different in terms of information that's being reported here? This part probably looks really similar, should look really similar. What's on the left-hand side of the page that you notice is different? These columns are the numerators and denominators for the achievement components, the learning gains components, and the learning gains lowest performing quartile component. If a student has a symbol, LQ, it means that the two surveys indicate that, and the prior year results indicate that kid's gonna be in the lowest quartile. If they have a LG, that means that student is going to be in the learning gain denominator. If they've got an ACH, it means that they are gonna be in the achievement denominator. All the other stuff that is to the left are reasons that they might not be in one of those categories, right? Again, we're just trying to organize it so that, A, you don't have so many principals and coaches wasting so much precious time trying to get this answer. And B, they're not wasting their time chasing down data to do that calculation. Like, A, they're not doing it at all. B, they're saving a lot of time that they don't have to spend trying to find information that tells them why a kid is not in the achievement component. Look at this record right here, student H. Why is that student in the learning gains denominators, but not in the achievement denominator? We can see that student has an ELL code of LY. They're in country less than 2 years. Okay, I get it. They're not in the achievement denominator, so that student wouldn't be counted. Why is that student not incorporated in the numerator? We don't see check marks for that student. Why not? So we can see the symbols here, and we can see, it's hard to see obviously because it's so collapsed, but they haven't grown quickly enough to earn a learning gain yet. They haven't made it from the low level 1 to the mid level 1. That's why they don't count. All right, my point in showing you this is that if you have this grade level detail, every kid on your roster has been accounted for in this way, then you can end up with a school grade estimator that looks like this. And this is, it's the whole thing, right? I mean, up here we see the percent of total points earned. I apologize for this. AP1 and PM1 are interchangeable in this case, right? So this is saying that at AP1, if we look across all the ELA and math components for the school, that school is projected to earn 49 points out of 100 on their school grade. And by AP2 or PM2, they're projected to earn 54 points. So that school has improved considerably from the first assessment period to the second. That's what it tells you. These categories will look familiar to you, right? They're just the school level components, and they've all been tabulated. And then you can break them out by grade level. And you've already got the student. Like, you seeing where I'm going here? If you're problem solving from the perspective of a district leader or a principal, you got it. But if it were me, I would never put this in front of a teacher because they don't care. or they don't want to care. So I heard somebody say they shouldn't care. I kind of agree, right? I don't want them to care about a school grade. I want them to care whether or not the students in their room are learning quickly enough. That's the point, right? Their bosses and their bosses' bosses get paid to deal with accountability. So I mentioned that these visuals are designed for specific audiences. That's what I mean, right? There's a lot of the same information on these things, but they point to different things. Such a good question. So the question is, are you suggesting that we not set goals? It's an important part of the process. I am absolutely advocating that you set goals, and I am absolutely advocating that you set ones that are realistic. So to give you an idea, when you look over thousands of these classroom profiles, that is the accounting of a teacher's classroom growth rate, 80% for either of those growth indicators is like a ninth stay 9 outcome. It is extraordinarily rare. We can come up with a few reasons as to why that is. Like, it's unlikely that every student is going to grow so much that that result is more positive than the error associated with a measurement. Right? It's just not likely. So 80% is the very top line. Thank you for checking me on the hyperbolic speech here. You can't reasonably ask for somebody to do what Ben Wyatt did. It just doesn't, it's a statistical anomaly. What you can ask for, 60% good enough? 70% good enough? We're setting goals around what percentage of your students are growing quickly enough, as opposed to how many of them scored 3 or higher on the assessment. Absolutely have the goal-setting conversation. Just set goals with a different metric, is our advice. I would keep everything that we just showed you a million miles away from an evaluation system. Like, honest to goodness, if you want this information to be toxic, mix the two. If you want it to be something that can guide a really helpful conversation around our collective responsibility of moving kids from where they came in to at least a year down the road. If they came in under grade level, then making sufficient progress toward proficiency. If you want to have that conversation, I'm coming back to do not commingle it. With school grades, with evaluation, it isn't about that. What we're trying to get at is people's hearts, right? Why they came to teach anyway. You use the term value add. They want to invest in the students that are in their room, and I think they will. But can you imagine a system that is reacting to false positive information chronically? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you just enough that I hope you're going to be convinced that the school grade projection thing actually works. But I'm not going to keep slamming the nail. I'm going to move on to K2 as quickly as I can. Okay. So in one of the districts that we were supporting this year, not surprisingly, they look at, this is a real clip from their school grade estimator, and they realized that we were projecting 37% and 26% proficient in math for them across 3 grade levels. This is what they were seeing in the FAST dashboard, 7% and 9%. Now, they were happy to have the better news, but they were reluctant to believe it. Like, how is it that yours are 20 points higher? How can both of these things be true? So what we did for them and what I'm proposing to do for you is just quickly take you through, here's how DOE is doing it, and here's how it works with percentile rankings, and here's which one was closer. All right, you guys probably know this, so I'm going to go super fast. This is how DOE is doing it. They're taking for any given kid a scale score, and they're mapping it to the cut points, right? So in this case, it's a PM2 result. They're mapping to a PM3 cut point. 200 points for 5th grade math is a level 1. That's what we see showing in the column there. 225 is a level 3. You get the idea, right? That's what they do. Okay, if you do it like that, this is what, for a cluster of elementary schools, their PM1 result looked like. Do you see the blue quarter pies? Yes. All right, what is the average result for math in terms of percent proficient for this cluster of schools? Ballpark. 10. I'd say maybe even 5 for math, and maybe closer to 10 or 12 for ELA. Is this consistent with your results for your Title I schools? At PM1, were you seeing that your percent proficient was close to 0? Yes. All right, did you panic? Yes. You didn't. All right, we had a few that said, nope, this can't be true, and I'm not listening to it. There are a bunch of people whose jobs are on the line for accountability that were, I want to use expletives, and I promised that I wouldn't because there are cameras. They were blah, blah, blah bricks. Yes, thank you, Brett. All right, the question is, was this prediction close, right? So I'm going to put a second data point on the plot here. This vertical bar, that's the actual outcome at the end of last year for those same schools. Was the PM1 accounting out of DOE's website remotely close to what happened at the end of the year? It really wasn't, right? Okay, does that mean the DOE's calculation is wrong? How can it be that goofed up and not be wrong? They weren't predicting, that wasn't the point. Interesting, so the speculation is that they wanted to show lots of growth from PM1 to PM2 to PM3. I don't know if you're right or wrong, I really don't. I think it's plausible. Cynics think you're right? So the thing about the way that they're doing it, by taking an earlier result and mapping it to a PM3 cut point, the assumption that they're making is that if the student took the end of year assessment right now, that's where they would be. And to your point, of course they're not going to be proficient. They haven't had a year's worth of instruction yet. All right? I'm going to say it in a way that's more ridiculous when you think about trying to use that metric to predict school grades. And admittedly, that was not their point. But if you were doing it that way to predict school grades, your baked-in assumption would be, if my kid, in fact, all of my kids, learn nothing from now to the end of the year, that's my school grade. If they learn nothing more, they test that same scale score at the end of the year, this is my grade. Is that helpful to you? How is it destructive? Panic, stress, right? Oh my God, what does this mean? What do you think it does to a parent? To get something in the mail, their kid's been a level 3 or 4 forever, now they're a level 1, new assessment. I'm gonna guess they're gonna come to the wrong conclusion. There's nothing wrong with their kid, right? It's just, it's kind of a weird way to report the result. So our wondering was, how can we use percentiles to answer a different question, which is, given the results at PM1, if my kids just learn at a typical rate between now and the end of the year, what's the school grade gonna be? Does that seem like a more reasonable, just a typical amount? And all that assumption translates to, technically, those students maintain their percentile ranking. If that student experiences typical learning, their percentile ranking will stay the same through PM2, through PM3. Now we can estimate a school grade. So that's the way using the percentiles works, right? I'm gonna go right back to the data reported by DOE in the spreadsheet. You pick up one scale score. What does a 214 mean at PM2 in the way of a percentile ranking? This is the part that's not obvious. It isn't reported. But if you have worked through to build out the norm curves for FAST and the Florida percentile rankings, so norm curves are just a relationship between a percentile and a scale score at a specific point in time. That's what they are. And so we did that. And these are the norm curves for 5th grade math, 22, 23. We've got 3 of them. We've got one for AP1, AP2, AP3. I love putting this visual in front of people because it concretizes something that is elusive. And that is that a scale score doesn't mean the same thing at different times of the year. Let me go at it 2 different ways. What scale score does a student need to stay to be in the 50th percentile at AP1? 50th, so just over 200. How about PM2, AP2? What scale score do they need? 210-ish. How about at PM3? 225, right? The expectation is that scale score goes up. The middle of the pack moves, kids learn. That's what that means. Let's look at it a different way. Let's take that 214 score that we were talking about. 214 at AP2 points to what? Ish. 55, it turns out to be 57. But what would that 214 point to at PM1? Meaning, what percentile ranking would a student be in if they scored 214 at PM1? Oh my gosh, right? 70 something? And what would that same score be, imply in terms of percentile ranking at PM3? Time matters. It matters a lot. All right, so what we're doing is taking the scale score, we're mapping to a norm curve. We go back to the thing I mentioned here, our little rainbow chart that we've come up with, and what does the 57th percentile point to in terms of achievement level for math in 5th grade? Level 3, right there. So, level 3. If we do the same thing for these other data points, we map these achievement levels, what do you notice is different between what's reported on the DOE spreadsheet and what we're coming up with in terms of percentiles? Everything's higher by about an achievement level. How can that be true? How can we be coming up with a different answer? The assumption is different. The assumption is different, right? What's being reported at DOE is if the kid took the test right now, what would they score? And they are doing that accurately, right? It's not wrong. That's just what it means. We're asking a different question. What are they likely to be at the end of the year, right? Okay, so that's how both of those things are true. I promised I'd go quick. Here's the punchline. Do you guys see the little gray circles? That's what the percentile estimates were at PM1. Who's closer to what actually happened at the end of the year? The DOE estimate, which is blue, or the percentile estimate, which is gray? Percentile estimate, I'm gonna go right through this. What we found is that the percentile estimate in this cluster of schools, 23 times out of 24, was the closer estimate. And even though it was higher, every time, it still undershot the actual outcome for the school, 19 cases out of 24. To convince you this wasn't just this cluster of schools, we ran it for middle schools, we ran it for other clusters of elementary schools, the outcomes are exactly the same. The trends are exactly the same. It isn't magic, it's that we're answering a different question. We don't wanna know what's our school grade if the kids took the test today. We wanna know what's our school grade if we continue to learn a year's material in a year's time from this point forward.